What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another Dteroit Lions video, of course, man. And this one's going to be a little bit different. Today, we are diving into a trade idea that was suggested by Bleacher Report, a big trade that the Dteroit Lions would be involved in. So let's get it started. Welcome everybody to another video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, man, we're back with something a little bit different, man. We're going to mix it up and we're going to talk about a trade idea that has been gaining some buzz, some attention recently. And that is the Lions making a splash move with a team that they've made some trades with before, a big trade when they swapped quarterbacks in the past. And this idea was put out there by Bleacher Report. Other websites may have had similar trade ideas as well, but this is the one that I've seen. It's gained a lot of attention, but I do want to make that clear. I do not believe this is a rumor. I haven't heard of like, well, there's talk that this could actually go down. It's just a trade idea that was put out there. Bleacher Report, shout out to them. They came up with some ideas, I guess, of big trades that could happen, and this was one of them. So I was like, hey, you know, it's the off season. There's not a ton going on right now, so let's mix it up a little bit. Let's have some fun. Let's talk about this potential trade, go through some of the pros and cons of this potential trade, and who knows, you know, anything can happen. Let's talk about this. So if you haven't seen it, you probably have, but if you haven't, it's, again, through Bleacher Report, and here is the trade suggestion. It is that the Dteroit Lions would acquire wide receiver Cooper Kupp from the LA Rams in exchange for the Dteroit Lions first round pick in this upcoming year's draft, which we all hope is at the very end of this year's draft. That'd be great. And then also in this trade, the idea is that, hey, if the Lions got Cooper Kupp, they should be even better, and then that first round pick should be even worse. So I mean, you know, that's part of the idea as well. Also would include one of our third round picks this year. They're saying the Minnesota Vikings pick that we acquired in the TJ Hockenson trade. We do have 2 third-round picks. However, it is also important to mention we may not have a 4th or a 5th-round pick, one of the two, in this upcoming year's draft because, again, of the Minnesota Vikings TJ Hockenson trade. I believe it's whether or not the Minnesota Vikings win a playoff game, but we could end up losing either our 4th or 5th in this year's upcoming draft. So while it kind of softens the blow because, like, hey, we got 2 third-round picks, we got ours and we got the Vikings, you may be missing a 4th-round pick. So it's important to keep that in mind. And then also a future 3rd-round pick, a 2025 3rd-round pick as well to make this deal happen. So that is the proposed trade idea. Apparently it resembles similarly to other big wide receiver trades that we've seen in the past, but you know where I had to start with this. I had to start off with the financial side. Hold up. The first thing I always got to ask, is this even financially possible? Does this even financially make sense? And the issue we always run into when we talk about things like this is there are so many variables that go into it because there's so many, like, is this guy going to get signed? What's his deal going to look like? Could it be backloaded? How are they going to structure the contract? There's so much unknown. We don't even know what the salary cap number is going to be for next season. There's that many unknowns, but we can still get an idea of what it would look like financially. And these numbers are according to Over the Cap, and also I believe Spotrac. Some of those numbers are also in here as well. But let's take a look at that first. So on the top left, you can see the Dteroit Lions cap space for the next 4 seasons, 2023, 2024, 2025, and 2026. The reason I did that is because Cooper Kupp signed another extension worth 3 years, essentially $80 million with the LA Rams, and now he is through 2026. I was like, dude, why is this guy's contract so long? He got another extension. I think for them it was to clear up some cap space and things like that at the time. But first off, you take a look, that's the Lions cap number on the left. 22.9 according to Over the Cap is currently how much cap space they have. On the right is where it would go if you added Cooper Kupp, and that again is according to Over the Cap. Now the way that we got to those numbers, you can see it in the middle, the Cooper Kupp cap hit via trade. Again, there's scenarios that go into this where it changes numbers and things like that. We've seen this where teams take on some money, things of that nature. But according to Over the Cap, to keep it simple, the idea would be that these would be the cap numbers for the Lions. This season wouldn't be very big to take on Cooper Kupp, only just over $6 million because he has an extremely low base salary, and then of course the $5 million roster bonus. Now for the Rams, financially, they do have cap space right now, but for the future they want draft picks. There was a report that they were thinking about trading away Matthew Stafford this offseason. I think a big part of that is, 1, their offensive line was terrible last season. 2, they want to get more draft capital because they did go all in. And 3, the long-term financial outlook is, hey, we did give Cooper Kupp this kind of long-term deal, and they have some situations like that. And, you know, you want to have a better roster. It's just simple as that. So they may be looking to try to reset a little bit. With that being said, quick point to that. If they did trade away Cooper Kupp, I would be pretty darn shocked because I would be like, who in the world are they going to throw the ball to? Like, Stafford's still there. They want to compete, right? That's been the word ethic. They still want to be competitive. Well, if you trade away Kupp for just draft picks. I don't know who they're going to throw the ball to. But anyways, that's besides the point. We're sticking on this trade idea. So you take a look at the financials there. Now 2024, that number would jump and it would continue to be pretty high through the next 3 seasons. Now it's not unbearable. $20 million cap it in 2024. Again, the $5 million roster bonus plus $15 million in base salary. You could see that through the rest of the way. 2025, $20 million cap it. And then 2026, essentially a $20 million cap hit. And you can see at the bottom what the Rams are going to have to deal with, the restructure that they had to create cap space. Again, you can see that his base salary is like nothing this year. Signing bonus. So Rams will have to take on that guaranteed money, but the roster bonus, I believe that we would take on through a trade. Things always get fuzzy here, but we know more when this happened. But again, according to Over the Cap, this is what we're looking at. Now, back to the left here at the top left. That is the Detroit Lions cap space, like I said, over the next 4 years. They are, as you can see, pretty much top 10. Yeah, they're top 10 in effective cap space over the next 4 seasons, including this year. They're top 10 in effective cap space in the NFL. Now, that wouldn't be the same if they added Cooper Kupp, but effective cap space just means you fill out your roster. If you filled out your roster with minimum deals, plus who you already have under contract, that's how much cap space you would have. And then, of course, you also would have to throw in the draft classes and things like that. But the Lions are basically, what I'm saying, they're in a really good financial spot for the next few seasons. But again, there's a lot of variables, re-signings, draft classes are going to start to hit. And as you can see on the bottom left there, that is something that I had to throw in. Key free agents this offseason. Offensive line is going to be a big one. Jonah Jackson, Big V, both free agents. At receiver, a lot of the 2 years and then the 1 year deal for Marvin Jones Jr. You got all three guys on there. Romeo and Charles, both of your edge rushers. Now, James Houston is set next year to be an exclusive rights free agent, so we can get him back on the minimum and there wouldn't be any negotiations there. So we basically can get him back if we want him back. So, you know, that should help a little bit. Mosley's set to be a free agent. There's void years, but he's set to be a free agent as he was only given a 1 year deal. Same thing with CJ Gardner-Johnson. Ryan Branch would be able to just step into that role after CJ Gardner-Johnson left if he did. And then at cornerback, you know, as I touched on with Mosley, you also have guys like Will Harris and Jerry Jacobs, who's set to be a restricted free agent as he was an undrafted free agent signing bias. But we'll have to see if the Lions are interested in making an extension happen there. So key free agents that are going to hit this offseason, so I definitely wanted to point that out there. Now, back to Cooper Kupp's contract again, if you go down the middle here. Couple things. First off, dead cap. Okay, I could be off on this, but I believe the dead cap would look something like this over really the next through 2024 through 2026 if you added Cooper Kupp. If you traded for Cooper Kupp and you got rid of him in 2023, you made a mistake, so I would hope that's not the case. But you see, the dead cap wouldn't, I don't believe, would be unbearable, but again, who knows what that contract will look if you acquired him. It definitely could change up. The big thing to focus on here, though, I think you definitely have to take a look at the receiving core. Who is under contract? Who's set to get paid there? Amon-Ra St. Brown is the key one. St. Brown 2024 would be his last season under contract, so he's going to be set to get paid. He'll be able to negotiate after this season with the Lions to get an extension. Now, as we've seen with guys like, on the bottom right, David Montgomery, Tracy Walker, Cameron Sutton, like we've seen certain guys get backloaded deals, and that Lions may go that way. So it may soften that blow where 2025, 2076, if you got an extension, maybe it's not that expensive in the front. That way you can handle the Cooper Kupp contract a little bit easier, assuming that he was there throughout the entire 4-year essentially contract that he would have through this type of trade. Jameson Williams, 2025 would be his last year with a 5th-year option in 2026. So he would also have that. I don't know if the Lions will pick it up. We really can't say anything on that right now because we haven't seen that much on him, but we'll see. Either way, he actually lines up pretty well with the Cooper Kupp idea. Mr. Williams has a 5th-year option, and then Antoine Green, who we drafted this year, is his last year will be 2026, so he'll be out throughout the entire contract. Reason I bring this up is because I'm more so looking at who has to get paid when. Rookie contracts usually aren't that expensive. Now, first-round picks can get expensive, like J-Mo. They can get a little expensive. Hutchinson's pretty expensive, but outside of that, they're not really. So the reason I bring that up is just looking at, okay, which guys are still under contract on those rookie deals that you're really not paying that much to. And then finally, this bottom section where I have Laporta, Gibbs, St. Brown, J-Mo, and then Antoine Green listed, I believe this is likely the guys that will still be under contract through 2025. Okay, so if we were just like, hey, who do we think will still be under contract? Green, we'll have to see. We don't know. He'll have to make the team, of course, this year, but he'll easily be under contract still. But Laporta, Gibbs, St. Brown, I believe will get an extension, and then also Jameson Williams, I don't think we'll move off him early. So I believe like all of those guys will still be under contract. So we'll actually have a pretty nice receiving core through 2025. So I just wanted to kind of point that out. At least on paper, we should have a pretty nice receiving core based on what's really getting paid there as well. Now on the right, a big part of the cap as well is, okay, who's set to get paid? The last thing I just hit on with St. Brown, paydays are coming up. The Lions are now entering, after the season, the first period where guys can start negotiating contracts outside of UDFAs. Now you're talking draft picks in the Lions' first draft class under Brad Holmes that are going to have the opportunity to negotiate with Brad Holmes for extensions. And also fifth-year options will be thrown in there as well, like Penei Sewell after this season. So the key guys that I think you have to include there's more players that were in this draft class, but the key players are Penei Sewell. Will the Lions pick up his fifth-year option? As you can see, if he makes another Pro Bowl, that fifth-year option could be over $18 million, and that's for one season, that's guaranteed. If he doesn't, it could be over $16 million. Or the Lions could say, you know what, we don't want to do that. We don't want to have it all in one place. Again, maybe if you want to push it back a little bit, you could try to get him on extension. Maybe you could backload a little bit. But St. Brown, also, again, he's going to have the opportunity to negotiate. He's going to be a free agent in 2025. Aleem McNeil, he's going to have the opportunity to negotiate. Those are three guys that I think for sure are going to be brought back in some way, shape, or form, so I throw those guys on there. But then you also still would have some key questions in that season as well. 2025, Taylor Decker is going to be a free agent. That's your left tackle. So now you're talking about both tackles set to be free agents. Lions will have to figure that out. Tracy Walker, who we believe is going to be a starter if healthy, he also voids that year. Would be pretty fine in terms of a Cooper Kupp deal, I believe, through 2024. Financially speaking, we actually would be fine, I believe, through 2024, with the biggest question mark really being Jared Goff, because Goff is set to be an unrestricted free agent in 2024. So then the question would be, do the Lions try to bring him back? They try to front load a type of extension, right? They try to extend it, or they go to Hendon Hooker. Like, what direction do they go there? That's a huge one because he's going to have the biggest cap hit likely. So that's a huge part of all of this is what happens with Jared Goff, the flexibility there. If you have Cooper Kupp, do you have to try to push it back? Even if you did, you still have to extend it pretty long to push it beyond where Cooper Kupp is actually getting paid. Now, the final point to that is that Cooper Kupp also should have some flexibility if a trade happened. I believe there was a year that you were like, oh, this is kind of rough. There should be some flexibility to restructure. As you can see, the base salary is pretty high through his 3 years, so he may be able to move his contract around. But again, that just adds guarantees and pushes the cap hit back, so that's not always something that you want to do. And then finally, you can see the players that have been backloaded. I think you always have to look at the salary cap. The way I've been doing it, I have a spreadsheet of players under contract the next 3 seasons. I think you have to look at it as a timeline. Like, when are guys getting paid? It's not how much are they getting paid and, oh, what is the total number? It's when are you getting paid so I can match it up. And we talked about potentially rolling over cap space into this next season with the Lions having the cap that they have available, hitting that 90% mark, but still being able to roll over cap space. They are set to do that currently as we speak. But you look, they've backloaded a lot of their deals they've given out. Cameron Sutton, his last year's 2025. He's backloaded. Walker's backloaded. Those are the last years they're going to be out of contract. Montgomery, Kaminsky, Anzalone have done. The reason I bring that up is because, again, if they had a guy like Cooper Kupp, they could look at some of those extensions to the St. Browns, to the Aleem McNeils, or even beyond that, maybe even to the next draft class, saying, hey, we're going to try to backload some of these deals, maybe not all of them. That way we can line it up a little bit better because Cooper Kupp is going to be getting paid. Unless you moved on from Cooper Kupp before his contract finished. But I believe there would be some flexibility to do that specifically into his final year, but even before that, you potentially could get out of that deal. Obviously, that's not ideal because you'd be giving up a first and 2/3, so to get out of the contract early probably means something not so great there. Actually, I think the Lions could afford to make this move. You look at who's under contract through 2025. Hutchinson, Josh Paschal, Broderick Martin, linebackers, Alex, Campbell, Malcolm, they're all under contract. Defensive backs, you'd have Brian Branch, Cam Sutton, Kirby Joseph. So you'd still need another cornerback. You'd still need another safety. You still need another interior guy. You'd probably need some edge rushers. But that goes into draft picks. And then also the question with that, when you always talk about flexibility, we don't know that all these draft picks are going to work out. Just because on paper we say, hey, we got Broderick Martin, that's the future. We don't know if it's going to work out, right? So that's just something to also keep in mind with this. The biggest question marks would be, number one, a potential Jared Goff extension, especially if they try to front load it. That would be a hiccup. And then also the offensive line. And those are two cons. If you were asking me, okay, give me some cons to this. Some cons, offensive line and quarterback. I believe I would always, for Jared Goff, if he's my quarterback, really for any quarterback, but let's just say Goff, for example, I'd prioritize saying, hey, we need to make sure this offensive line is right over adding another receiver like Cooper Kupp. We need to prioritize that because we were great against zone coverage, as Cooper Kupp is one of the best in the league against zone coverage. But a big part of that was protection, pass protection. So the Lions need to keep that. They need to keep Goff upright. He's not super mobile. He's not a scrambler, right? He wants to stay in the pocket, plus the running game. And when you have Taylor Decker, who's coming up on his contract's coming to a close, you do have Frank under contract. Both of your guards, however, both free agents after this year. Penei Sewell going to set to negotiate after this season, right? Because then it's his 5th-year option. So your offensive line would be my first priority over adding receiver. Those would be the two key question marks. You probably could do it, but it's something to keep in mind. Maybe Kobe Sorstel proves himself. He pushes into a guard spot. Now you're not having to pay one that much, right? Maybe you draft a couple players and you're not having to go sign them on free agency or re-sign everybody, and they're able to step in and play. There's definitely ways and options around it, but it just comes back to the flexibility. It's really the flexibility, and it's also some of the unknown. You're not only giving up a good amount of cap space, assuming, just as simple as it is, and the Lions don't move it around, because you always can move things around, but you're also giving up draft picks. Now, if the end of the first round pick is, a late pick, that's great, and then the 2/3, you do have an extra third, but you could be missing a round 4, and then your next year third on top of that. However, you also have to keep in mind that you did acquire a future fourth in 2025, which I think is important to bring up, so you do have a little bit, again, of softening that blow, because you traded away DeAndre Swift. You acquired a 4th round pick from Philadelphia in return for DeAndre Swift, okay? So you also still have, I think, ample draft capital that this wouldn't be like, oh gosh, we made this move, now we can't do anything in the draft. You still would have pretty good amount of draft capital as well, on top of, the financial cap space. You're in a pretty good spot to do this. Though, quick point to that, you do lose some, in my opinion, power to move around throughout the draft. Having an extra 3rd round pick or a 4th round pick through the draft board allows you to potentially get aggressive or fall back and try to find and pick and choose those players, specifically on day 2 and day 3, or even when the Lions moved up to go get a Jameson. One, the quarterback, you wanted to extend him and Jared Goff, and you weren't just going right to Hooker. Obviously, if you went right to Hooker, you open up a lot of cap space, but, that's one of them. Number 2, a lot of these guys, who knows, there's still some question marks out there. At cornerback, is this Mosley the guy? Even if he is, okay, now you got to extend him on top of that, right? Jerry Jacobs, does he stick around? Can you hit a cornerback in the draft? Do you need a defensive tackle? Is Aleem McNeil able to play kind of that 3-tech type of role, or do you need to go find one? Edge rusher, right? Is Josh Pascal really stepping into a bigger role, and he's doing that? You want to believe it, you drafted these guys, but just like J-Mo, you believe that he's going to be a big part of this offense, but you still have to see it, and at this point, we haven't seen it yet. I do believe in J-Mo, I think he's going to be great, but I think it's something, you still have to see it, and to build through the draft, it's kind of that balance of, you want to believe in the draft picks, but you also want to give a guy that wants to build the draft picks. I don't like taking those away from him, considering what I believe he's done over these last few years in the draft, and how great it's been, and also you made the Riley Patterson trade, so that's a conditional. Go through some of my major pros and cons that I was able to come up with of adding him. The first and biggest question that I would have in terms of the con side, and this may not be a con, but it's the biggest question that I would have if I made this deal, or if I was considering making this deal, and that's outside of the the draft capital, outside of the money, is touches. Feeding your receivers, feeding the playmakers, feeding the guys that you invested in, is how many touches are there to go around. Jared Goff, this past season, his pass attempts went way up, 582. That's a really high number. That's a pretty high number, I should say. However, if you look, his career high is 626. So if we just said safely, it's somewhere in that range for the most part going forward with a guy like Jared Goff. So that's kind of the targets we can expect to give out. Now I think you have to take a look at who the Lions have and who have they invested in. Okay, the first and biggest thing, of course, is Amon-Ra St. Brown. I believe St. Brown and Cooper Kupp play a very similar style. I went through, watched like 8 Cooper Kupp games, some from 2021, some from 2022, just to make sure on this. I think they play very similarly, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But St. Brown, of course, is your number 1. He's that guy. I expect him to get a long-term deal. So one thing you have to keep in mind is that, hey, if you pay Amon-Ra St. Brown, which I expect them to do, even if you traded from Cooper Kupp for Cooper Kupp, I still want to pay Amon-Ra St. Brown. Kupp was still great this past season, though his season was shortened with an injury. He played in 9 games, had a high ankle sprain, and ended up actually having surgery. So he only played in 9 games this past year. He doesn't have like an extensive injury history. 2021, he had a knee bruise. 2018, he had a left ACL tear. 2017, he had a groin injury, but he hasn't had like a massive injury history. He's also 30 years old, which I'm sure will be brought up. I don't have as much concern about this. 1, you saw him last year. He was still extremely productive. 2, usually it's like years in the NFL. Well, for him, he's a little bit different. He hasn't actually played in the NFL that long. Reason being is he started and played 4 years in college at Eastern Washington, and just quick point to that, the guy's production was ridiculous. He had 73 receiving touchdowns in 4 years at Eastern Washington. I just thought that was insane. So there's that as well. So maybe that's a potential con or concern about making this type of deal. But I think, of course, I still want to pay St. Brown. I think you have to pay a guy like St. Brown, even if I add Cooper Kupp. So now you're potentially paying both of these guys. As I said, you could try to backload that St. Brown contract. I'm assuming they'll probably overlap at least in 2026 at some point there, and their cap numbers will be pretty high together. Then you can kind of come down to, okay, do we want to move off Cooper Kupp here? Do we want to keep him through these 4 seasons? Like, what do we want to do with that? And then maybe you'll have to move around it a little bit. But I still want to pay St. Brown regardless if I made a trade for Cooper Kupp. I think you have to look at the mouths that you have to feed in terms of the Lions offense and guys that you've put legitimate investments into. And I'm really going to simplify this. I think you could go much deeper with it, but let's just take like the top 4 guys in that sense. St. Brown, I think you could basically say at least 150 targets. Last year he was close to that. It was a jump from last year. You could argue that it goes even up even higher. In 2021 when Cooper Kupp was with Stafford and he basically became the guy on that offense, the guy had nearly 200 targets. I don't know if St. Brown will get to that, especially if they add Kupp. I would assume that he wouldn't get to that, but without Kupp, you know, who knows? I mean, he could push his way up there regardless. So I think safely you could say about 150 targets for St. Brown. So you take that out. Sam Laporta, how many targets do you want to give this guy? To me, his biggest strength is route running as a tight end. He's a mismatch, man beater type of piece at the tight end position. We did a video or the podcast talking about this. So how many targets do you want to give him? You have to think about it. Last year, Hockenson had 43 targets before he was traded. So he was on pace for like, you know, 85, 90 type of targets with the Lions. Now, the targets dropped off when they traded him away. Brock Wright, Shane Zylstra, they kind of were just like complimentary tight end pieces in there. So I'm not even including those guys. If we want to just go on the safe side, 70, 80 targets you want to give to a guy like Sam Laporta because that's his best asset. You want to see him grow. Now, maybe year 1, that's less because they kind of push him into that slowly, but the targets would still probably go somewhere. James Mitchell, Brock Wright. Then you take a look at a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs. His best asset to me, the highest grade I gave him, was his receiving upside. I believe he can be a great dynamic receiver out of the backfield and can align in different spots. We already know he's aligning in different spots. And I would think you would have to get at least around the 80 target range to feel good. You may want more than that. You have to think DeAndre Swift this past season had 70 targets and he played in 14 games. Some of those games he didn't really even play in. We did the thing on it. It was like half the games he didn't even have, 10 plus targets / touches in a game. Like that's still a lot of targets, and that's on the really safe side there for Jahmyr Gibbs, plus you had the 16 from Jamal, but those are the 3. Then finally, Jameson Williams. Now, Jameson isn't here right now, but the idea that he will be here. So you're talking about 4 guys, and I would say Jameson, I don't know where you want to hit the target range here. Maybe between, I don't know. I think that could range between like 60 and 100 targets because one side of it, we could just say 100 targets for the idea because we've had kind of a rotation more so than just like a pure outside top guy. Where we drafted JMO, we expect him to be the consistent like number 1. He's the guy on the outside. So I think when you look at it like that, you could say closer to 100 targets. But like, for example, Chark had 52 targets last year. Josh Reynolds had 59 targets. You expect him to be on the field more consistently. But either way, those are like the 4 guys that you want to get touches. You want to get the ball towards because not only do you want to just give them the ball because they're your playmakers, you also want to see them develop. So if you have Cooper Kupp, you have to fit him into that. Now, even if we go on that side, we're looking at about 400 targets between really, I think, those 4 players. Somewhere around 400 targets, and that could be on the safe side. So I do feel like a guy like Cooper Kupp, you could make him fit into that. You could fit a guy like Cooper Kupp into that. However, it definitely, to me, could be taking away from obviously some of the role pieces, the James Mitchells, the Brock Wrights, but I don't expect like they're asking a ton of a lot of those guys. Maybe James Mitchell I think could take a little bit of a jump, but some of those guys I don't think they're asking a ton. David Montgomery not asking a ton there in terms of receiving. However, Khalif Raymond, now he's only got 1 year left, so you could look at it and say, well, he's not a long-term piece anyway, but Khalif Raymond, who had a lot of targets for the Lions last season, I believe over 60 targets, and where I think Khalif Raymond is really good, obviously taking the top off, I think he's a very tough route runner, very good route runner, but also what he's able to do underneath. It hasn't necessarily been always his calling card, but we saw it at times last year, the option routes, the things that Cooper Kupp does well, he started to be utilized in this past season. So you're taking away from that as well. I'm not saying that he does it better than Cooper Kupp. I believe Kupp does that role better. Obviously, Khalif gives you more of that deep threat, and even with Khalif and Kupp, they could coexist, especially without JMO, because Khalif can still be one of the guys that takes the top off. I think even if you look at the statistical side of that, Cooper Kupp hasn't been a very huge average depth of target type of player throughout his career. For example, with Jared Goff, 2018, 7 in terms of average depth per target. Compare that to Amon-Ra St. Brown this past season, who was at 6.9, which PFF consistently points out was very low for how good he was against coverage. But that's kind of his role within this offense. Now, we know St. Brown wants to kind of expand on that, and we saw Cooper Kupp do that. 2019, it bumped up to 9.3, and at its highest I saw, 2021, it was 11.4. But again, they had the best pass block win rate that season as well, and that completely fell off this past year, which is me personally, I prioritize offensive line first. But even with that being said, this past year, DJ Chark, 13 average depth of target. Khalif Raymond, 14.5. Josh Reynolds, 15.7. So those guys would kind of have to, I believe, sink into those roles a little bit more. However, the downside is it would take away some of the production they could have outside of those roles. And obviously, again, you could make the case, all of those dudes, 1 year left on their deal, they're not long-term anyway. So it's just a case you can make. You could throw Antoine Green into that as well. Though you can make the argument that's fine because he only has the 1 year left anyway, and same thing with Josh and same thing with Marvin. So really you'd be taking away, I think, from a lot of those role pieces. You just don't want to take away from those guys that you invested big in. They're saying these are going to be core pieces of what our offense is. You don't want to take touches away from them, and I think you could find a way to make that coexist. My big concern would be with the Sam Laportas and really the Jahmyr Gibbs, because a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs, I don't view him as a guy you're going to line up on the outside and say, hey, be the deep, like, Jahmyr Gibbs as a receiver where he's going to be most productive is level 1, maybe some level 2, but level 1 passes that Swift did, and some of that Cooper Kupp honestly does. Cooper Kupp, like St. Brown, they play very similar, lines up in split back sets. Cooper Kupp lines up, as a tight end. He's like a sniffer. Like, he lines up in different positions similar to what Amon-Ra St. Brown does. So that would be one of the cons or questions that you could poke to. Now, if you want to look at some of the positives of this, number one, some statistics we need to touch on. Number one, in 2021, he was one of the best second read receivers in the NFL, meaning when the quarterback went to him with his second read, he was the third most successful according to PFF in 2021, which if you hypothetically just said, well, hey, St. Brown's my 1 and Kupp's my 2, or however you want to look at that, Kupp can still be ridiculously productive and successful, not being the go-to guy. So it means that he can coexist with others, as we've seen. He's been able to do that. He can coexist with others. Number 2, the third down impact as well. It's a big reason that I thought Sam Laporta is going to be huge, is because when it's third down, when it's obvious passing, when it's 3rd and 8, when you're playing a man-heavy team like the Pats, and you have to just beat somebody, go win one-on-one, I thought at times we struggled last year. This is a guy that you could say would help you in that department, because in that 2021 season, 45% conversion rate on third down for the Rams, and he was a massive part of it, specifically in that intermediate range. That's another benefit that he could add to your team. It's just another piece there. Great example, Panthers. See him dropping edge rushers out, essentially double teaming him. The Patriots kind of did this to us this past season. Now we adjusted schematically, we came out quick hitters, did some things different. But if you had a guy like Kupp on one side that was getting that attention, it could hypothetically free up a guy like St. Brown to maybe not get as much attention, because now everybody becomes one-on-one, and now he can go to work because he can dominate without having help. And you would occasionally see when he was lined out on the outside, he would get the top corner, like here against Tre'Davious White. And if you had that, you could potentially try to get the number 2 on your opposite receiver. With that being said, you can look at some of the advanced statistics, like from 2021. He was a much more effective player from the slot and actually on the right side of the field than the left side on the outside. But he's been much more consistently effective when in slot alignment. He's had proven success against man coverage, which, as I just pointed on, was an area I thought we had to get better. Now, with that being said, it was really shown off in 2021, where he graded first according to PFF against man coverage. St. Brown this past year graded second, though I feel like we need more pieces that can do that. That's where I look at Sam Laporta specifically as filling that kind of role, as well as Marvin can help there. Jahmyr Gibbs can help there as well. Oh, I think it's important to keep in mind that he was a much more 1/3 type of split between slot and outside in 2021. He played much more in the slot in 2021, about 2/3 of the time, versus this past year where it was almost 50-50 playing slot and outside. Now, where I think that's important, because I don't know how PFF exactly does it, I think it's clear when watching him, especially against teams that play man-heavy. Zone's a little bit different, but especially against teams that play more man coverage, I think it's clear that he is much more impactful at a slot alignment when he has more of a 3-way go, when he has more options that helps him attack leverage. He's able to utilize his incredible agility. We saw it in his 3-cone drill when he was coming out. It was an insane score. He's able to utilize that. He's able to utilize his hands. He's able to pace himself off the release, set up leverage, and then also when they bunch and they stack and he can play through that, like St. Brown, high FBI. That's how he wins a lot of the time. Like, that's where he's dominant. However, when he's purely on the outside and he's matched up man-to-man, he can win, but he doesn't consistently win the same because it's not necessarily his skill set that fits that. The pro would be what he does well would keep Jared Goff very comfortable. It would allow you to add one of the best run after catch type of receivers in the league. Okay, that's another thing. I think he has some of the best contact balance from any receiver and also some of the best hands. Now, some of the stats about him never dropping a pass or not dropping a pass past year, I disagree with that. I think there was a couple I thought he dropped, but they could have put him on the quarterback or a PBU. Regardless, though, he still has incredible hands, excellent body control. He's clutch. It's top-notch reliable hands. It's almost instant run after catch. And then also the body control, the sideline awareness, the feel to stay in bounds, to find little zone holes. Like, he's so good at attacking leverage and also finding spots. Then here you see those loose hips in the red zone. It's disgusting underneath. And he also has some of the highest FBI. He's very humble. He's very good to his teammates, something that, of course, would easily fit in with an offense that asks receivers to make a lot of reads. But I will also say to that, Khalif, that I feel like can do similar things as Kupp is a very good run blocker. Khalif is a good run blocker. He would be taking away from some of the touches of guys that do those certain things. Now, the reason I think it would work, it could work, is because, yes, he's not going to be the guy that you come in and say, look, he's the opposite of St. Brown. You line him on the outside. I just wouldn't line him on the outside as much. I mean, you can, depending on who you're playing, but I would allow him to, again, play in those bunches, play in those stack releases, play in a slot alignment, allow him to have a three-way go, use his football intelligence. The league plays like 72% of the time now zone coverage. He might be the best zone coverage receiver in the National Football League. And you'll see the way that he separates with change of place, eye discipline. Again, being able to be in that three-way go position where he can attack the leverage and then create from there with excellent body control and agility. Now, you'll see some of the struggles again. I think sometimes he gets held up against, press coverage, for example. But he does have really nice route strength, a little bit of a lack of range in terms of a pass catcher. And then you'll get some things like this. He's not like the twitchy outside receiver, but he's really good at what he's good. He's up there with Amon-Ra St. Brown. Two guys that are incredibly crafty. You see it at the top of his route. He doesn't win with elite speed. Those crisp cuts and burst out of cuts. Where he wins is he's able to use great eye discipline. The way that he opens up defenders at the second and third level. You'll see some of the subtle hand usage, specifically at the release when he's trying to get free. But then also when he's breaking at the top of his route. You'll see it on drags. You'll see it on over routes. He doesn't consistently separate on over routes with speed. Guys can keep up with him. But he has to use those subtle movements to create space, put defenders in tough positions, attack leverage. He wins that side of the game. So I don't look at him and say like, oh yeah, this is perfect because he gives me the opposite of St. Brown. No, I think he gives you a lot of similar to Amon-Ra St. Brown, which is the reason I don't think we need to do this. I don't think the Lions need to do this. However, do I think they could coexist? Yes, I think they could coexist. Just play them to their strengths. And the Lions have the pieces in Antoine Green, Marvin Jones Jr., Josh Reynolds, Khalif Raymond, who would probably go more towards that role if you added a Cooper Kupp, of the second, third level attacking presence. If you did a play action pass, Cooper Kupp is not the guy that you want running over top. He's the second level underneath guy, which is usually what Amon-Ra St. Brown is, or your Sam Laporta's would be. So I do believe they can coexist. I don't think there's a great argument to say like this cannot work. I do believe this can work, but I think on the flip side, I don't think it's necessary. I like the Lions receiver room. J-Mo, let to see what J-Mo looks like when he gets back. But even outside of that, I still like our receiving core because I think you can't overlook the Gibbs receiving impact, the Sam Laporta receiving impact. There's a reason they added them. And I think for both those guys, that's their biggest strength, is what they can do in the passing game. So for me, I think you have to include them. You can't just take out those two guys and say, well, what's the receiving core look like? Because it's about where the targets are going. I don't care what the receiving core looks like. Who's going to get the ball? Those two guys will get the ball in the passing game a lot and at different alignments, like Laporta in the slot, like Gibbs in the slot. They'll line up at different spots. So I don't think it's necessary. That's kind of my takeaway on this. And I like to keep draft picks for Brad Holmes. But if you told me the Lions did it tomorrow, would I say this can't work? No, I would say, oh, this can work. You'd have two elite receivers. This can work. The question you would have to ask yourself, is this necessary? Is this the move that the Lions need to get over top? Is this the necessary move? Or could this potentially hurt the Lions more than actually helping them get over top? I would lean towards not making the move if it was up there. But again, would I be like, oh, this can't happen, this can't work if they did it? No, I wouldn't say that, because I do believe that with a guy that's this talented as Cooper Kupp, you could find a way to make it work. With that being said, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.